Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter and are appreciated. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus upload, shall we? All right, really quick. Last night in the live stream, a few people, not a lot of people, were talking about Victor and a couple of different things, which got me thinking about the book. And I'm like, Tuesday, I am going to call the publisher and figure out what we can do to work around the kind of obstacles that were put up. Take some of the forward out, remove 2 chapters, and edit this, which I did. I have both. I have the original uncut version of the book saved, and I have what they asked me to do. And I decided that if they don't have an answer for me, that I am going to figure out a way of putting it out somehow, even if I don't know. I'm going to figure it out. And because it's a book, like it's information he shared on this channel. Nothing more, nothing less, except for two of the chapters that I was asked to take out were emails, private emails between he and I, where he shared things with me, but I had talked about them on the channel, not in detail, but a couple of different things, like in attacking New York State. A famous person had gotten attacked in New York State, in Western New York. I don't see why the holdup is still being held up. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But I figure, you know what? I'm going to talk about it as much as I can today and see what kind of buttons I can push. So right here, this is how the book starts out. This is chapter 1 of the book about Victor and his life as a government cryptid hunter.
Well, let's start this off at the very beginning. My dad worked for the agency for 30 years and 1 month to the day retired at the ripe age of 62. He would have loved to have done another 10, but he said he was getting slow. And at the time, I really didn't understand, but I do now. I was born April of 1960, and I was the youngest in the family. My dad was my idol. I worshipped the ground he walked on. He had already taught me at a very early age gun safety, and to clean what animals that I killed, and to take them for food for the table. I took my first white tail at the age of 8, dressed it myself. A friend of my dad's that I was hunting with helped me get it out and to the processor. At the age of 12, I took my first black bear, and just so happened my dad was home for that hunt. He was so proud we skinned it out together and packed it out, and he carried far more than I was able to carry, but we got it out in one trip. Then seeing my dad became much fewer and far less often than any of the family liked. My school ending rolled around, and Mother did everything in her power to get my dad home for my graduation. But it was truly a busy time for him. And what I would later learn, when they call you, you must go, and go then. It was June of 1978, and my mother was telling him she needed to talk to him about my plans about life, since he was unwilling to help me get a job like his. He was all for me getting a state-level game warden job, but did not want me to do what he was doing. She got a message to him through his boss that I was waiting to join the military, and he sent word home to my oldest sister that that would be just fine. So the next day, I went and signed up with the United States Marines. 12 days later, I was at Parris Island in boot camp. Man, was it hard, but I made it, and I was in pretty good shape when I went in. After boot camp, no one would mess with me. 6'4", 228, all muscle. And everyone in the family came to my graduation, except for my dad. What a letdown. He finally called and talked with me, and tried to explain that he was working a case and couldn't get away, and said that he was sorry, and someday he would make it up. That day never came in my eyes. Years roll by, and it's August of 1985, and it's time for me to re-up my papers, and Dad's retiring. So I call a close friend of his in Georgia, and ask him to help me get my dad's job, and he agrees to help. His name was George Cruz. Actual name, long time dead and buried now. We fill out the paperwork, and bam, the agency jumps all over it, like a dog on a bone. Told me that they would make an announcement at his ceremony closing. I told them that he was not going to like it one bit, and they asked me if I was the man of my own, or if my dad made my decisions for me. And I answered them that I made my own decisions. Last day of August in 1985, we all attended his ceremony for his retirement, and they really put it on for him. I was super proud of my old man that day, and all he had done in his time with the agency. Then they told him they had one more surprise for him, and asked me to please come forward and stand beside him for a couple of minutes, so that they could get everything in order, and I do as I was told and take my place beside him. We are talking back and forth, and the speaker starts to talk again, and he asks my dad who would be a good replacement for him. My dad starts to think about some of the recruits, then realized it was me who they were going to replace him with, and you could tell he was not happy. He then asked to speak to the commander and asked one favor, and that was not to hire me for that position, but it was denied. This brings us up to September of 1985, and they take me in the office area and show me where my desk will be. It was my old man's. Then into the file room, and there are rows and rows of files, and they tell me to pull a file, any file I chose, and sit and read it completely. Not to put it back till I've read it all and looked at the pictures, if there were any, or the drawings, which they knew there were some. Also, to write down the file number and take good notes on the file, because I'd be quizzed on it. I opened the file and actually smiled and chuckled a little when I started to read. The agent in the room asked what was so funny. I replied, "You expect me to believe what I'm reading is to be true? My dad would have told me long ago if something like this existed, and would have never let me go into the woods alone when I was 7. He told me to finish that file and be ready to take a test on it the following morning, take it to my quarters, so I will know it inside and out. So I studied it just like I was back in school and went to my room for the night. I called my dad and asked him one thing, how much of this was true. He told me that every one of those files holds real cases, and this is what he's been doing for the last 30 years of his life. The next day I go in and ace the test, and the agent says, "I see you've talked with your dad and have taken all of this to heart. He said that you'd be ready to go into the field in 1 week, so we will find that out soon enough." So then 3 more agents come in and tell me it's field trip time, but I can't see the first part of the trip, so they blindfold me and then handcuff me and I ask what this is about, and they explain it's for my safety, and laugh. We start walking, and it's like we walked for 2 or 3 miles, and I can hear them speaking to other people, and them speaking back, and speaking to me very politely. Then we come to what I assume is an elevator, and we go down for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. By this time, I'm starting to get a little unnerved, and asking questions, and only getting about half of them answered, but I'm still hearing other people talking. But we have walked another maybe mile, and it's all dirt. And now it's growing silent, and there's a smell of fresh hay, and an animal smell that I can't put my finger on. They begin talking to me and say they are going to reposition the cuffs, if that is okay, and want me to step up with them onto a platform that is in front of us, and I say okay. At this point, they are telling me that there is nothing to worry about. It's standard protocol for all this to be done for every agent. That it tests their hearing and smell. So, me and 2 more agents step up onto the platform, and they move my hands out to the sides and put cuffs on both hands. Then I step forward, just a little, and bump what feels like a plate glass window. One of the agents asks what I felt, and I lean my head forward and put my head against a piece of glass that feels like it has holes in it or something like that. Another agent asks what I hear, and everything goes very quiet. But I can hear a faint noise. It sounds like something stepping ever so softly toward my location. They explain to me to take note of my surroundings and listen, and take in the odors and tell them what they are. And I say that I know I smell fresh hay. I can smell some sort of animal, but I'm not sure if that is correct or not. Could be some type of foliage. Then, without them saying anything, something came up to the glass where I was standing, but on the other side of the glass, and was breathing heavily enough for me to hear it. I smell it and realize that I was probably in a bad way at that very moment. I then heard movement from behind, and it sounded just like what I had heard walk up to me from the front, and I knew I didn't have any glass behind me, and I wasn't about to say anything at that very moment. Then the movement from the rear stopped and the blindfold was removed, and looking dead into my eyes was an 8'2" werewolf. That was their breeding male that was captured in Louisiana. This thing let out a roar and went beating and pounding on the glass in front of me. I was so close and it was so loud that my ears bled from the volume that came from this creature, and that went on for a good 6 to 7 minutes. Then I was introduced to the werewolf. Its name was Sebastian. It was nearly black in color, except its face is now showing gray, for the most part. I was then released, and I continued to talk to the creature, and it almost acted like I understood what it was saying. One of the agents said it did understand the majority of what I said to it, and said that if they were to leave me alone, it would continue to talk to me, and that it would finally get what it was trying to say across to me, and that it would quit showing aggressive behavior towards me, because I had shown none towards it, while it was screaming at me. There was no use in showing me any. I couldn't run or do anything to get away from it at the time all this was going on, so I just stood there as still as possible and hoped it hushed soon. Then they showed me what type of creature I had been chosen to deal with, which would be my specialty, and was going to be a werewolf followed by Dogman and then Bigfoot. For the next 10 days I spent reading more encounters and sitting, learning their paperwork system and visiting downstairs the creatures that I would learn to hunt and track, to learn their smell, and to know what each one felt like, so you could tell the difference in the dark, which, believe me or not, would come in handy in the future. All of this was taught to me by a man much older than myself, and was retiring for about 3 weeks from now. He said that our field training was coming up next, and then they would issue me all my gear and traveling pack. My main piece of gear back then was a .45 cal handgun, and 2 days at the range and reloading bench to develop a load for my weapon and my weapon alone. Then we received a call. It came from the game warden service in Maine. This was to be my first ever call. I grabbed my clothes and my belongings and headed to the office. I beat my trainer to the office by 20 minutes, and our commander was there. He sat me down and told me that I would have help on this one, and to listen closely to how Scott took care of everything, and to watch and to let him take the lead and not get in any trouble. He explained to Scott the same things, and then spoke with him privately like he was giving him special orders or something. And I could say that I actually didn't like the way it went down. They come out of the office, and the commander says, "Happy hunting, stay safe, see you soon." We left out the back and hopped on a helicopter and headed to Maine. Scott told me this was my hunt, and he was just along for the ride, and we would arrive after daylight. We'd have a vehicle waiting for us at the landing point. We'd go into town first and talk with the victim's family. They were being held at the jail, and the victim was still in the woods with several officers around him, to make sure nothing bothered the body until we got there. Myself and Scott both dozed off and woke up to a beautiful sunrise. We get in an SUV, and Scott's driving, and we go to the sheriff's office. And they are not there, but at a nearby bed and breakfast. So while they go and get them, we go and get some breakfast. Scott has turned sick and calls the office and reports that he's sick, and that I'm on my own. I go back to the sheriff's office and set up in a room and start to interview the family members one by one. I chose to interview the youngest first, and his name was Abel. Abel was 14 years old, and I explained to him what I was there to do, and asked him what I needed from him to do to help me out, if he was able to do that. He answered in a quiet voice and said he would try. I told him if he really wanted someone in the room with him, it would be okay, but he declined. I told him that I would make this as easy as possible on him. Just tell me what you heard and saw that night. Just take your time, think about what you are going to say, and then say it. So let's start with what you heard. Think for a minute, then answer, okay? He replied, sure. He sat silently for maybe a minute and a half, then spoke really soft. He raised his head and looked at me straight in the eyes and asked if I had ever watched a werewolf movie. And I answered and said, yes, I have. Is this what it sounded like? He spoke again, a little more determined this time, and said, yes, a wolf. I said, this must have scared you, and he replied, no, not really. I had my dad and 2 older brothers with me, so I really wasn't scared. I said, that's good. You should enjoy the outdoors as much as possible, and always remember this is a freak thing that happened. He said, okay, but I could tell it didn't help much to a 14-year-old. I then said, one more thing for you and me, and we're done, okay? What did you see when you saw this animal? We were all laughing and joking about the howling going on, and things got really quiet, like the bugs quit making any noise, and my dad and oldest brother got out their pistols just in case it was a bear, or, as my dad said, a predator of some sorts. We can hear it walking around our camp, and it sounds like it's getting closer and then further away, and then it will howl some more and then walk some more. Then, without warning, my dad lets out loose a shot into the air, into the direction it sounds like it's coming from. And you can hear this thing take off running and making an awful noise. But it doesn't sound like it's breaking brush, like it's running, and you can see where it's running and not running into things, and it's getting closer and closer. He yells at me and David to get in the tent and tells Johnny to get to the far side of the tent. And if he gets an open shot to take it, and keeps running for what sounds like 2 minutes in silence. We can see our dad at the far side of the fire, and he asks Johnny, "Do you see anything?" And he replies, "No." Johnny said, "I think it left the area," and him and my dad start toward the fire. My dad was closer to the fire and had just arrived when we all heard gurgling and looked at Johnny, and this thing was standing maybe 10 feet in front of the tent, holding him up in the air with blood pouring out of his neck. Its face covered in my brother's blood, my dad froze, and I and my other brother jumped inside the tent. Dad dropped to his knees. I just knew he would be next, but what felt like hours was probably only a minute. At most, it dropped Johnny and turned and looked at me and David. Took a couple steps in our direction. It had a flat face. It looked like a man, except it was covered in all hair, maybe 9 feet tall, and covered in blood. Finally, it turned and started at our dad. He was still on his knees and no longer had the gun in his hand. This thing walked within 3 feet of him and could have killed him just as easy as my brother. We tried to get Dad to leave, but he wouldn't even speak to us. So all we knew to do was to get back into the tent and curl up together and wait till morning. David did get Johnny's handgun, and we didn't get much sleep, but we did get a little. The next morning, we had no idea which way to go, but there were 3 ladies that happened our way and found and seen what had taken place and took me and my brother the 6 miles back to the regular campground and got the help that we needed to come and get our dad out of the woods and take care of our brother for us. I said, "Well, that's good. What did they? Are they taking care of you all well? Getting you fed and everything?" He said, "Yes." I then asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" He wanted to know what my job was and what I would be doing. I then explained that I would be here to help him and his family get through this difficult time and see that his dad got the care he needed, and that I would take care of what hurt his brother the way it did. He then said, "You better just let that thing go." I didn't explain that part very well to the young man, but I have gotten better since then, and that was the first time. Next up was David. He was more cocky from the get-go. He was slightly older than Abel. David was 17 and wanted to know before he answered any questions why he or any of his family were not allowed to call home. And I explained that since it was an animal attack, that duty fell on the sheriff, and he had already notified their family, and that his mother and his aunt and uncle were driving out to pick the 3 of them up. Made arrangement for Johnny's body. I was straightforward with him, and he took this like a young man to his very core. He then asked about his dad, why he had froze like he did and not moved in action and tried to save his son or his brother. He was called his dad a coward for not acting and trying to save his brother. I explained different people handle stress in different ways, and that your dad didn't react very well at all, and that he acted like most people would react seeing one of these creatures. But that did not make him a coward, and his dad needed all of the support and love he could get right now. He sat there for a few minutes, and then I asked him if he had anything else he would like to ask, and he said maybe in a few minutes, and I told him that'd be okay, and asked him if he could help me out by answering some of my questions now. He said they would try, but Abel was probably the clearest-headed one of us at the time. And all done was to reply, "Just answer the best you could." So Abel described the creature to me as having a long snout. Is that true or false? He said that's false. He was closer to it than me, and we even talked about it in the tent after it left, making sure we seen the same thing. It had a flat face. I said, okay, that's what he said. I just needed to know to make sure you both were on the same page about what you both saw. He kind of giggled and said trick questions, and I promised there would be no more questions. that would try to trick him. I then said, when the creature stood in front of you and Abel and your dad, and was holding your brother's body up in the air, was its arm fully extended? He told me he was not sure, but that his brother's head had fallen back and was above the creature's head, and that it held him up there for a little while, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes before dropping him. I then asked what it was holding him by, and he replied, what was left of his neck, and he was holding it with its right hand. I had not mentioned the right hand at this time, but all werewolves are right-handed. So he brought this up and answered before I was even able to ask the question. Then it turned and walked toward my dad, or your dad. Did your dad ever look up at it, or did he just continue to look at the ground the whole time? He never once looked at it, and all this time his pistol was lying on the ground in front of him. I told him I was glad that his dad did not reach for the pistol, and that upset David again, and I knew I was close to having to end this part of his interview, as he was not coping well with what happened, and I asked him if he would like to speak with a professional to help him with his emotions. He accepted gladly. I forgot to add that I did ask this to Abel also, and he said he would speak with his mom, but he thought it would be a good idea. I then told David he was going to be fine and not to let this discourage him about spending any time in the woods, that these things are so rare that the chances he will never see another one in his life, and that when these things happen, something has happened when the creature to cause it to act that way. That's normally not their normal behavior. So now it's time for their dad, Gene. And I can hear him, and I'm all the way back, and someone spilled the beans. His son Johnny was still lying in the woods, waiting on me to complete my interview, and this is just going to make it harder. I take a 10-minute break, hoping he will calm down, and I even consider not even interviewing him the way he was acting, and just head out into the field and start doing what I needed to do. The 2 boys had already told me what I'm going to be hunting, and it was taking a human life, which means that it had to die, or I must die. Try killing it. Just how it plays out. I call and check on Scott, and he sounds like he has got the worst instead of better, and tells me I need to do the interview with the dad and then go on the hunt, and if he gets better, he will join me as quick as he can. I enter the room, and he starts cussing and raising hell and telling me what I need to do and how do I need to do it. And the sheriff is standing there trying to get him to sit down, and nothing's working. And you have to remember that I'm a big boy, but this fella Gene is quite a bit taller than me and probably weighs about the same as me. Everything is okay till I sit down and tell him I have some questions that must be answered before I can go into the field. Then he snaps, shoves the sheriff, and comes after me like a raging bull of some sorts, and just as soon as he gets in striking distance, I put him on the floor. 2 or 3, maybe more deputies rush in and cuff him and check on the sheriff, who's probably 65 at least, sits him at the table, and I start my questions, and he will not answer me. So I tell Gene I have days to sit here before I go see his son Johnny, and this breaks him down crying and gets me his answers. Makes me feel like a dirty bastard to have to break him down this way, but it works. I need from him, which is not very much at all, just mostly verify what the boys had already told me. Also, go to your youngest witness first. They will tell you the truth before the older one will. The older people like to interject themselves into the investigation, so they will sound important or have a role in it. He did tell me one thing that stood out to me. He said that he can look at things and tell how tall they are. Or he told me this werewolf would be 8'7" tall, and it was the tallest one I ever dealt with in my career, my first one. After we finally had him calmed down enough, I offered him help and told him that I offered his boys and that they both wanted. He also accepted. He and they were sent to the nearest naval hospital to their home and stayed in their programs, and all three completed their program. The youngest, still to this day, contacts me every year around the holidays and checks on me. We don't talk about what happened anymore. He just asks how close is retirement and that he knows where I can get a good doctor. This all happened at Round Pond Public Land, Ashland, Maine, 04732. 20,000 acres of public land set aside. You can read about it on the park online. Nothing about this attack you will ever find. September 24th, 1985. My first hunt was supposed to be with my trainer Scott. My trainer is sick and can't go into the field after I complete the interviews. It's now 11:30 hours. I have just spoken with Scott by phone again, and he states no way can he go into the field with me, as he is far too sick and would cause more damage than good. If he says I have to go now and get the job done, just make sure to take my time and don't make a mistake with what I've been taught. I call into the office and speak with the commander and let him know what has happened with Scott and asked how am I to proceed. He explained to me that most times when an agent is sent into the field, as long as the odds are not worse than 3 to 1, we go alone unless other agents are sitting doing nothing. And I remind him that I have not completed my training and have had no field training whatsoever except for being told what to do and what not to do. I'm then informed that all the other agents are out on calls at this time, and he can't call one in to help me at this time, and I must move ahead with my hunt. I then disconnect my call home to my wife, and tell her I will see her in a few days. And she is all excited that I will be back in Georgia in a few days. So now, I get the sheriff to lead me out to the location where it took place, and the campground is empty. They decided it would be better to send all the campers away till this was resolved. There are several sheriff cars in the parking lot, and one older ambulance. I put on my pack, and we start our hike, the 6 miles to where the body is now being protected by deputies. He is questioning me the whole time out there about this creature and how it came to be in his area. I told him as much at the time as I felt comfortable telling him, and he was very receiving of what I was telling him. He didn't understand how it was going to be swept under the rug as a bear attack, with kids seeing what they saw and what his dad saw, but that's the reason they are sent to the Naval Hospital for help, to erase the memory of what they had seen and replace with the image of something else as a bear. So we arrive at the body, and they had a low tent over it, and it's not 6 miles back into the woods. It might have been 2.5. I have them take the tent down. The body is covered by sheets, 3 to be exact, not much blood coming from the top sheet. As I'm looking around, I step behind the tent that they were going to sleep in. I find a spot of attack and where he lost 75% of his blood. The sheriff or his men have not seen this yet, and the crime scene has been photos supposedly. When I pointed this out, 5 of the 8 deputies lost their breakfast nearby. It was a brutal scene. So I'm talking into a handheld cassette recorder, taking my notes and telling these deputies what needs to be done, and the sheriff is giving me no grief over ordering his men around. I ask them to get the one who takes their photos back out, and let's finish up this scene before we lose any more daylight. Another deputy shows up with a camera, and it's now 14:45, and he pulls the sheets off the body, starting at the feet. I have asked anyone with a weak stomach to please move away because this is going to be the worst thing any of them has seen. I now have 2 left with me, and they were the first 2 at the scene, so they've already seen the body and know what to expect. They covered it up or telling me as I uncover the body where the wounds begin. I have not yet seen the body other than pictures and have been killed by creatures at this time, so I am not really sure what to expect, but I know I can't let myself look weak in front of these people. So I'm taking my time rolling these sheets up and start to see blood on his clothing that is not came through the sheets. At this point, the 2 deputies suggest let them get on each side. They will slowly roll up the sheets, and this is the plan we go with. Finally, we are at his chest, and most were standing far enough away they can't see the body, and one of them says, "Get ready, it starts here." They lift up where I can see, and what I saw didn't even look like a human being. The rip started about the center of his chest, went straight up all the way through the very top of his head. All you could tell it was in one fluid motion. All the cuts were at least 2.5 inches deep. Could have been more. There was one side motion rip across the neck that was deeper than the upper rib. That's what made the head fall back. His vertebrae was showing. There was nothing anyone could have done to save this young man from this creature. I now had all the pictures I needed. This creature killed him for sport and rubbed his face in the victim's neck just to get blood all over his face. There was no bite wounds on the body, but the boys both said its face was covered with blood. After he was covered back up, he was placed into a body bag, and the long walk out with the rest of the procession of the family and cleanup of the area was walking out. I spoke with the sheriff and let him know that I would really appreciate if someone would take my rental back and leave it with Scott, and he agreed. He also told me that he intended to lock the gates on the way out, and I said that'd be fine. His last words to me was that, "You must be nuts." So we parted ways, and I checked the area more closely now and found that the creature came back during the night while they were guarding the body. Now, knowing that it was coming back to the area of its kill, I made my plan. They had come in the opening maybe 20 feet square, so I went to work as fast as I could. I had seen a lot of swans on my way in the lake, so I doubled back, started to feed them, and sure enough, I was able to get one close enough to throw a ground cover over it and catch it. My plan was to take it to the opening after dark, build a small fire, tie out the swan, and wait for the creature to make its move. I got everything ready, and dark came. I built up the fire, tied the swan up in the middle of the opening, and moved into the brush to wait. Several times I heard a large bipedal animal moving, but no sounds to truly identify it. Daylight comes, and this swan is quit as all get out, just like it was all night. But I finally come out of my place in the woods and check my surroundings. It's a bright, beautiful, sunshine-filled day. I'm walking by the area that is soaked with Johnny's blood and look down at it. And shit, the creature has been there and laid down in the spot and rolled like a dog. I was able to follow its tracks for almost a mile, and then just nothing like it vanished into thin air. I pulled out my phone and called my dad, first person I can think to call. His first suggestion is to check the trees. Said they will climb and sit and wait for you to pass. So I hang up, check my surroundings, and head back. I call Scott and tell him what has happened, and he says these things are smart. You just have to be smarter. And if it got that close, it feels it is smarter than you are. It will be back. You are at the right place, and it will try to take your decoy sooner than later, just to prove to you that it's smarter. I asked how he's feeling, and the truth came out about something else. That meeting he had with the commander was for him to act sick, and for me to go alone. to see if I could make the cut. He refused my dad's request not to hire me, but he told him he would not make it easy on me. But now Scott felt like I could be in more danger than anyone had thought. He was going to call the office and report what was going on and see if he could join me at this point in time, and that he would call me back shortly. His last words to me then was to find me a wide open spot, sit still till I heard him. So I moved to another opening, maybe 75 yards from the spot that was almost 40 yards square, and I got right in the middle of it and was just sitting in the sun waiting for my phone to ring. I don't know how long it had been. The sun was still up in the sky, and I know I had fallen asleep at some point, but the swan started making all kinds of noise, and I decided to check on it, but decided to go a different path than the one I had come over here on. It was much thicker and much more cover than the one I had came on. As I made my way towards the noise of the swan, it stopped making noise. I stopped in my tracks and waited and listened, but could not see the swan any longer. So I figured it was just carrying on about something, but I also knew that these creatures were not only creatures of the night. This coming into my mind, I readied my rifle and sidearm just in case and start to move forward. My heart is beating out of my chest at this point, and I have not even seen anything to make me that way yet. But there I was, inching forward, my rifle at the ready, looking for any sign of movement, thinking why I didn't go the other way around to the area I now needed to be in, and why was my heart beating out of control. I had been sent on missions in the military and had to kill. Was this going to be any different? The only thing I could think was these things were a lot closer than my other targets, and they had ways of taking me out that I knew was going to hurt like hell. My hands were sweating. I was sweating all over. Then I heard it. It was smelling the air. What came to my mind, I was locked and loaded, but where was it? Could not see it anywhere. All the noises I was hearing was coming from in front of me, or were they coming from behind me? I was questioning everything. I was running through my mind at this point. Then silence. Nothing. Maybe it left the area or was out of hearing distance. I don't know, but I was not moving right then to find out. I didn't move for more than an hour. My legs were getting Charlie horses in both of them, and I knew I was going to have to move. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I didn't like my position. My gun was waist high, and I took one step and heard a footfall, and then I knew it was still in front of me, but where? I couldn't see it. I rolled my wrist to see my watch, 16:25, and it was time to get out of where I was standing. I was not in a good way. Move forward or move back. I had two options, and as in the Marine Corps, we always move forward. So I took a deep breath and took another step, and what a relief, my legs. But there was also another footfall when I did this, and still no visual of what was making them. Two more rapid steps forward and left a little, and one more footfall, and still no visual, but I believe I'm zeroing in on the noise. Then another 5 fast steps straight ahead, and I see a patch of black fur moving to my left, and in front of me, maybe 25 yards ahead of me. I have a visual of something, just not sure yet of what. It's not moving unless I'm moving, so before it gets darker, I start to walk to my left, trying to get to a small opening, and then realize it's going to cut me off before we get there. We are now maybe 18 yards apart, not a clear shot, even with my 4.58 Win Mag that I have. When I hit this thing, I don't have a chance of getting back up. I then speak to it very calmly and ask if it wants to return to Virginia with me, and that I understand that mistakes happen and can be fixed. I wait a brief minute, maybe 2, standing there, watching me, what it was doing to see what its body language was telling me, or if it was going to answer me, but instead I got a very low, intense growl, and it started to grow in intensity, and by the end of a minute its head was tilted back into a full outright howl that sent cold chills down my spine. And all I could think was, I better not miss when he charges. And he is going to charge now. Or it's going to be at any minute. He was ducking his head, looking at me and snarling, and carrying on. He knew I was there to kill him, or to be killed, and the fight was here and now. I had given him a way out, but he had refused his freedom, more important his life, unless he took mine. Even if he did take mine, there would be others that would come after him, and he knew that, so he chose to make his stand here and now. I had put another 7 to 8 yards between us now, and got myself on leveler ground, and was still speaking to the creature in a calm voice, almost at shoulder height. And ready, I was as ready as I could be. No mistakes, nothing. He is a hell of a specimen, bigger than our breeding male, by at least a half a foot, I'm guessing. And he's 8 foot 2 inches tall. Finally, I'm tired of talking, and he gets this look on his face, and I think to myself, he is going to run away. Do I just shoot him? That is what I'm supposed to do. Anyway, he has killed a human, and that is what we do. Just as I finish my thought, he answers my question. He charges me as fast as he can, and if I had not been so close to ready with the rifle, he may have won. But when that wind mag hit him, it hit him in the chin. He hit the ground and just lied there. I bolted another round in the chamber. I was shaking, and then walked over to him. He looked up at me. His eyes were sad. He knew he had lost the battle. I sat down just out of arm's reach. Well, he died. It wasn't that long, maybe 2 minutes. He wasn't struggling for air. He was just lying there, very peaceful. Had he jerked or gasped for air, I would have done him right then and there. I would have done the right thing. I walked out to the phone in the campground, made the calls, and got the people there, and we picked the creature up. He was like Gene had said, 8 feet 7 inches, and weighed 470 pounds. This was my first hunt, and my first werewolf kill. It's also my biggest werewolf that I've ever killed since I have been doing this. We flew this one to Virginia. This was before the release, so there was no ear numbering, and as Scott returned, he was able to retire. I was never given any field training, so I've been self-taught as far as that goes.
And there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go. And honestly, what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.